Marcus Williams had owned the 15-acre plot of land on the outskirts of Riverside County for over 20 years. He inherited it from his grandfather, who bought it back in 1962 when land was cheap and dreams were big. The property sat quietly at the end of Oakwood Drive, mostly undeveloped except for a small cabin, where Marcus would spend weekends fishing in the nearby creek and tending to his vegetable garden. Marcus was a 58-year-old mechanic who worked hard 6 days a week at his auto shop downtown. He wasn't flashy or loud about his business. Most people in the area didn't even know he owned such a large piece of prime real estate. The land was worth a fortune now, with the city expanding rapidly and new developments popping up everywhere. But Marcus wasn't interested in selling. This land represented his family's legacy, a place where his children and grandchildren could always come home. The property had clear boundaries marked by old oak trees and a rusty fence that his grandfather had installed decades ago. Marcus kept all his paperwork in perfect order. The original deed, tax records, and survey maps were stored safely in a fireproof box at his home. He paid his property taxes every year without fail, never missing a payment. The county records showed him as the rightful owner, and he had the documentation to prove it. Marcus lived modestly in a small house in town, but he cherished his weekends on the land. He would drive his old pickup truck down the dirt road, park near the cabin, and spend hours walking the property lines. He knew every tree, every rock formation, and every inch of the creek that ran through the southern portion of his land. Sometimes his grown daughter Sarah would bring the grandkids out to visit, and they would have picnics under the big oak tree that stood in the center of the property. The area around Marcus's land had been changing rapidly over the past 5 years. What used to be rural farmland was now becoming an upscale suburban community. Big houses with perfectly manicured lawns were replacing cornfields and pastures. A fancy shopping center had opened just 2 miles down the main road, complete with a Starbucks and an organic grocery store. Property values were skyrocketing, and developers were constantly calling landowners with cash offers that seemed too good to be true. Marcus had received dozens of calls from real estate agents and developers over the years. They would offer him millions for his 15 acres, explaining how he could retire comfortably and never work another day in his life. But Marcus always politely declined. Money wasn't everything to him. This land was his roots, his connection to his grandfather's memory, and his legacy for future generations. The neighborhood was also changing demographically. When Marcus first inherited the land, most of the residents were working-class families like his own. Now, expensive cars filled the driveways of million-dollar homes, and the new residents seemed to have very different ideas about how a neighborhood should look and function. Marcus noticed the difference when he would drive through the area on his way to his property. The old sense of community was fading, replaced by something more formal and rigid. Marcus kept to himself mostly, but he was always friendly when neighbors would stop by his cabin to chat. He would offer them cold drinks from his cooler and share stories about the area's history. Some of the longtime residents remembered his grandfather and would tell Marcus how much they respected his family's commitment to the land. But as the older residents moved away or passed on, fewer people knew the Williams family history. One particularly hot Saturday in July, Marcus was working in his garden when he noticed surveyors' flags appearing along what he thought was his eastern property line. Bright orange and pink flags on metal stakes were scattered across a section of his land where he had been planning to plant new fruit trees. He walked over to investigate, wondering if the county was planning some kind of road improvement project. The flag seemed to follow a line that cut right through his property, including the area where his grandfather's original fence stood. Marcus pulled out his property survey from his truck and compared it to what he was seeing. According to his documents, these flags were definitely on his land, not on any public right-of-way or neighboring property. Marcus decided to make some phone calls on Monday morning to find out what was going on. He wasn't the type to panic or get angry quickly, but he was certainly curious about why someone was marking his land without his permission. He had always believed in handling problems calmly and rationally, just like his grandfather had taught him. That weekend, Marcus spent extra time walking his property boundaries, taking photos of the surveyor flags and noting their exact locations. He wanted to document everything carefully before making any inquiries. His grandfather had always told him that good records and patience were a man's best tools when dealing with property matters. As Sunday evening approached and Marcus packed up his truck to head back to town, He had no idea that his quiet, peaceful weekends on the family land were about to become much more complicated. The surveyor flags were just the beginning of a much larger situation that would test everything his grandfather had taught him about patience, preparation, and standing up for what was rightfully his. Monday morning came quickly, and Marcus was on the phone with the county surveyor's office before 9 a.m. The woman who answered seemed confused when he described the orange flags on his property. She put him on hold for several minutes before returning with information that made Marcus's stomach drop. The surveying work had been ordered by Prestige Communities Development Corporation for something called the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. Marcus had never heard of either organization, but the county clerk explained that Prestige Communities had filed paperwork 6 months ago for a major residential development project. According to their records, the project was approved for construction of 96 luxury homes on a 40-acre plot that included several parcels of land in the Oakwood Drive area. When Marcus asked specifically about his 15 acres, the clerk put him on hold again for what felt like an eternity. When she returned, her voice sounded uncertain. She told Marcus that according to the development plans filed with the county, his land was listed as acquired property under the Oakwood Estates project. Marcus felt his hands shake as he gripped the phone tighter. He explained that he had never sold his land to anyone and demanded to know how this mistake had happened. The clerk apologized and suggested he contact the development company directly to sort out the confusion. Marcus immediately called Prestige Communities and was transferred through multiple departments before finally reaching someone who claimed to handle property acquisitions. The man on the phone, who introduced himself as Richard Blackwood, spoke in a condescending tone that immediately rubbed Marcus the wrong way. Blackwood insisted that Prestige Communities had clear title to all the land in the Oakwood Estates development, including Marcus's 15 acres. When Marcus explained that he had owned the land for over 20 years and had never sold it to anyone, Blackwood paused for a moment before suggesting that Marcus must be mistaken about his property boundaries. He claimed that their research showed the land in question had been abandoned and was acquired through proper legal channels. Marcus felt his blood pressure rising but kept his voice calm as he informed Blackwood that he had all the original paperwork and had been paying taxes on the property for decades. Blackwood's tone became even more dismissive as he explained that large development projects often involve complex property histories and that small landowners sometimes misunderstand their actual ownership rights. He suggested that Marcus hire a lawyer if he had concerns, but warned that fighting a major development corporation would be expensive and time-consuming. The conversation ended with Blackwood telling Marcus that construction would begin as scheduled and that he should stay off the development site to avoid any legal issues. Marcus hung up the phone feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. He had never been talked to so rudely, especially about property that he knew belonged to his family. He immediately called his daughter Sarah, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm downtown. Sarah was furious when she heard what had happened and offered to help her father research the situation. That afternoon, Marcus and Sarah drove out to the property together. What they found shocked them both. Not only were there more surveyor flags, but construction equipment had already been moved onto the land. A temporary trailer had been set up near the main road, and workers were clearing trees in an area that Marcus knew was definitely within his property boundaries. Sarah took dozens of photos while Marcus confronted the site foreman, a burly man named Tony who seemed genuinely surprised to learn that someone claimed to own the land. Tony showed Marcus the work orders he had received from Prestige Communities, which clearly indicated that all necessary property acquisitions had been completed. When Marcus showed Tony his property deed, the foreman scratched his head and admitted that he was just following orders from the company. Tony was more respectful than Blackwood had been on the phone, and he seemed genuinely concerned about the situation. He explained that his crew had been hired to clear land for the first phase of construction, which would include 32 homes in the eastern section of the development. According to his paperwork, this was exactly where Marcus's property was located. Sarah noticed something interesting as she reviewed the development plans that Tony showed them. The Oakwood Estates project was being marketed as an exclusive luxury community, with homes starting at $800,000 each. The HOA fees alone would be $400 per month, and the community would feature amenities like a clubhouse, swimming pool, tennis courts, and a private golf course. Marcus realized that his 15 acres were prime real estate for this type of development. His land included the highest elevation in the area, with beautiful views of the surrounding hills. It also had mature oak trees that would be perfect for an upscale community that wanted to maintain a natural feel. No wonder prestige communities wanted his property so badly. That evening, Marcus and Sarah spent hours going through all of his property documents. Everything was in perfect order. The original deed from 1962 was clear and unambiguous. The annual tax payments were up to date. The property surveys showed exact boundaries that matched what Marcus had always believed he owned. There was absolutely no question that the land belonged to him. Sarah suggested that her father hire a real estate attorney immediately, but Marcus hesitated. Lawyers were expensive, and he wasn't sure he could afford a long legal battle against a major development corporation. Sarah reminded him that the land was worth millions of dollars, and that he couldn't let someone steal it from him, regardless of the cost. Marcus spent a sleepless night thinking about his options. He could hire a lawyer and fight the development company in court, which might take years and cost more money than he had. He could try to negotiate some kind of settlement with prestige communities, though Blackwood's attitude suggested they weren't interested in reasonable discussions. Or he could take a different approach entirely. By morning, Marcus had made a decision that would surprise everyone involved in the situation. Instead of rushing into a legal battle, he would be patient and strategic. His grandfather had always taught him that sometimes the best way to win a fight was to let your opponent make the first mistake. Marcus decided to let the development proceed, while carefully documenting everything that happened. He had a feeling that prestige communities and their Oakwood Estates HOA were about to learn a very expensive lesson about doing proper research before starting construction on someone else's land. 3 weeks after his confrontation with prestige communities, Marcus watched from his cabin as construction crews arrived in full force. Heavy machinery rolled onto his property every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. Bulldozers, excavators, and dump trucks created a constant stream of noise and dust that completely changed the peaceful atmosphere he had enjoyed for decades. Marcus had made a decision that puzzled his daughter Sarah and shocked his few close friends who knew about the situation. Instead of getting a restraining order or filing an immediate lawsuit, he chose to document everything while letting the construction proceed. Every morning before work, he would drive to his property and take photos of the progress. Every evening after work, he would return to take more photos and carefully note what had been accomplished that day. Sarah thought her father had lost his mind. She begged him to hire a lawyer and stop the construction before it went too far. But Marcus remained calm and patient, explaining that he had a plan that required perfect timing. He asked Sarah to trust him and continue helping with the documentation, which she reluctantly agreed to do. The first phase of construction focused on clearing land and installing infrastructure. Marcus watched as workers removed dozens of mature oak trees, including some that his grandfather had specifically mentioned in old letters. The destruction was painful to witness, but Marcus forced himself to stay focused on his long-term strategy. He photographed every tree that came down, noting their approximate age and location on his property maps. Within 2 months, the construction site had been transformed into the foundation of a luxury subdivision. Paved roads replaced dirt paths and underground utilities were installed throughout the area. Street signs went up with names like Prestige Boulevard and Oakwood Circle. Marcus noticed that the road names were designed to sound expensive and exclusive, exactly what wealthy homebuyers would expect in an upscale community. The marketing for Oakwood Estates was impressive and aggressive. Large billboards appeared on the main highway advertising luxury living in now, park-like setting and custom homes starting at $800,000. A fancy sales office was built near the entrance to the development, complete with architectural models of the planned homes and a landscaped parking area for potential buyers. Marcus visited the sales office one Saturday afternoon, pretending to be a potential home buyer. The sales representative, a well-dressed woman named Jennifer, gave him a complete tour of the planned community. She explained that all 96 homes would be custom-built on large lots with premium features like granite countertops, hardwood floors, and 3-car garages. The HOA would maintain all common areas and provide exclusive amenities for residents. Jennifer was particularly enthusiastic about the eastern section of the development. which she described as the crown jewel of Oakwood Estates. This section, which Marcus knew was entirely on his land, was planned for the most expensive homes in the community. These lots would feature the best views and largest oak trees, with prices starting at $1.2 million. Jennifer explained that this section was already 60% pre-sold. Even before construction had begun, Marcus asked detailed questions about the HOA structure and learned that Prestige Communities would maintain control of the association until at least 75% of the homes were sold and occupied. The HOA fees would start at $400 per month, but could increase annually based on community needs. All residents would be required to follow strict architectural guidelines to maintain property values and community standards. As construction progressed into the fall, Marcus continued his daily documentation routine. He purchased a high-quality camera and began taking professional-level photographs of every aspect of the development. He also started keeping a detailed journal, noting weather conditions, crew sizes, equipment used, and progress made each day. The first model homes were completed by December, and Marcus attended the grand opening event. Hundreds of potential buyers toured the beautifully decorated houses, which featured every luxury amenity imaginable. The homes were stunning, with soaring ceilings, gourmet kitchens, and master suites that were larger than Marcus's entire house in town. During the model home tour, Marcus overheard conversations between Prestige Communities executives and potential buyers. The executives were confident and boastful about their development, claiming they had assembled the land parcels through strategic acquisitions and innovative financing. One executive mentioned that they had acquired several properties for well below market value due to their expertise in identifying undervalued assets. Marcus also learned that the first 32 homes in the eastern section would be completed by spring, with new residents moving in by summer. The sales office had a detailed timeline showing that the entire 96-home development would be finished within 18 months. Based on the pre-sales numbers Jennifer had mentioned, Prestige Communities was expecting to generate over $90 million in revenue from the project. By Christmas, the construction had reached a point where individual home foundations were being poured throughout Marcus's property. Each foundation represented a $1 million investment that would soon become someone's dream home. Marcus calculated that Prestige Communities and their contractors had already spent several $million on his land, not counting the infrastructure improvements and marketing costs. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Marcus. While he spent his days working on other people's cars for modest wages, a major corporation was building a luxury subdivision on his land without his permission. Every day, the value of the unauthorized improvements increased, making the eventual resolution of the situation more expensive for everyone involved. Marcus's patience was being tested, especially when he received a certified letter from the newly formed Oakwood Estates HOA, demanding that he remove his unauthorized cabin from the development property. The letter was signed by Richard Blackwood, who had apparently been appointed as the interim HOA president. Blackwood claimed that the cabin was a code violation that detracted from the community's upscale image. Sarah was furious when she read the HOA letter and again urged her father to take immediate legal action. But Marcus remained calm, adding the letter to his growing file of documentation. He explained to Sarah that every day the construction continued, every dollar spent on his land, and every arrogant letter from the HOA was building his case for the ultimate confrontation he was planning. As winter turned to spring, the first luxury homes neared completion. Marcus could see potential buyers walking through the construction sites on weekends, imagining their future lives in the beautiful houses being built on his family's land. Soon, innocent families would move into these homes, having no idea that they were about to become unwitting participants in a property rights battle that would make headlines across the county. While Prestige Communities continued building luxury homes on his land, Marcus was quietly building something far more powerful, an ironclad legal case that would shock everyone involved. His strategy required patience, precision, and perfect timing. Every day that construction continued was another day of evidence that would support his eventual claim for damages. Marcus had finally hired an attorney, but not the type Sarah expected. Instead of choosing an expensive corporate lawyer from downtown, he selected Martha Rodriguez, a solo practitioner who specialized in property rights, and had a reputation for taking on big corporations. Martha was a 45-year-old former public defender who had grown tired of seeing ordinary people get pushed around by wealthy developers. Martha was initially skeptical when Marcus first contacted her office. Property disputes involving major developers were usually complex cases with murky ownership histories. But when Marcus arrived at her office with a meticulously organized file containing his original deed, decades of tax records and hundreds of photographs documenting the unauthorized construction, Martha realized this was something special. "Mr. Williams," Martha said after reviewing his documentation, "this is the clearest case of property theft I've seen in 20 years of practice. But I have to ask, why did you let them build so much before contacting a lawyer?" Marcus smiled and explained his strategy. Every day the construction continued. The value of the unauthorized improvements increased. Every home that was built, every road that was paved, and every utility line that was installed became an asset that legally belonged to him as the property owner. By letting prestige communities complete their development, Marcus was allowing them to increase the value of his land by millions of dollars at their own expense. Martha was impressed by Marcus's patience and strategic thinking. She explained that under property law, any improvements made to land without the owner's permission legally belonged to the landowner, regardless of who paid for the construction. This meant that Marcus could potentially claim ownership of all 96 luxury homes, plus the roads, utilities, clubhouse, and other amenities that Prestige Communities was building. Together, Marcus and Martha developed a legal strategy that would maximize his leverage while minimizing his risks. They would wait until the development was substantially complete and families had moved into the homes before revealing Marcus's ownership. This timing would create maximum pressure on Prestige Communities to negotiate a settlement, since forcing families to leave their new homes would create a public relations nightmare. Martha began conducting her own investigation into how Prestige Communities had claimed ownership of Marcus's land. What she discovered was a sophisticated scheme involving forged documents, bribed officials, and fraudulent property transfers. The company had created fake paperwork showing that Marcus's land had been abandoned and acquired through a tax sale that never actually occurred. The investigation revealed that Richard Blackwood, the Prestige Communities executive who had been so dismissive of Marcus's ownership claims, had a history of similar schemes in other states. Blackwood specialized in identifying valuable properties with elderly or absent owners, then using fraudulent paperwork to claim ownership before the real owners could respond. Martha also discovered that several county officials had received consulting fees from Prestige Communities shortly before approving the Oakwood Estates development. These payments appeared to be bribes designed to ensure that no one would question the company's ownership claims or examine the property records too closely. While Martha handled the legal investigation, Marcus continued his daily documentation routine. By spring, he had accumulated over 2,000 photographs showing every stage of the construction process. He had detailed records of equipment used, workers present, and progress made each day. This documentation would be crucial for calculating the value of the unauthorized improvements. Marcus also began researching the individual families who were buying homes in Oakwood Estates. These were mostly young professionals and successful business owners who had saved for years to afford their dream homes. They had no idea they were purchasing houses built on stolen land, and Marcus felt sorry for the difficult situation they would soon face. The first families moved into their new homes in May, just as Marcus had predicted. The eastern section of the development, built entirely on his land, was now home to 12 families who had paid over $1 million each for their luxury houses. Children played in the beautifully landscaped yards while their parents commuted to work in their expensive cars. Marcus occasionally drove through the completed sections of the development, observing the community that had been built on his property. The homes were undeniably beautiful, and the landscaping was immaculate. The HOA had done an excellent job maintaining the common areas and ensuring that all residents followed the architectural guidelines. However, Marcus also noticed signs of the typical HOA power struggles that often plagued upscale communities. Some residents had received violation notices for minor infractions like leaving trash cans visible from the street or planting unauthorized flowers. The HOA newsletter was filled with complaints about noise, parking, and maintenance issues that seemed petty, given the expensive homes involved. Richard Blackwood had established himself as a tyrannical HOA president, sending threatening letters to residents who questioned his authority. Several homeowners had already hired lawyers to challenge excessive fines and arbitrary rule enforcement. The community that was supposed to represent luxury living was becoming a source of stress and conflict for many residents. Marcus received several more letters from the HOA demanding that he remove his cabin and stop trespassing on development property. Blackwood's letters became increasingly aggressive, threatening legal action and criminal charges if Marcus didn't comply. These letters became valuable evidence for Martha's case, clearly establishing that the HOA knew Marcus claimed ownership but chose to ignore his rights. By summer, construction was nearly complete on all 96 homes. The clubhouse had opened with a grand party attended by local politicians and business leaders. The golf course was receiving its final landscaping, and the tennis courts were ready for use. Prestige Communities was preparing to transfer control of the HOA to the resident homeowners, marking the official completion of the project. Martha informed Marcus that this transition period would be the perfect time to reveal his ownership and file their lawsuit. Once the HOA was controlled by innocent homeowners rather than Prestige Communities, the dynamics of the situation would change dramatically. The homeowners would be forced to choose between supporting the company that sold them their homes or acknowledging Marcus's legitimate ownership rights. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as the moment of truth approached. For over a year, he had watched strangers build a luxury community on his family's land. Soon, everyone involved would learn that the patient mechanic who had been dismissed and threatened was actually the rightful owner of everything they had created. The final phase of Marcus's plan required perfect timing and careful coordination with local media. Martha had contacts at several newspapers and television stations who would be interested in covering such a dramatic property rights story. When Marcus finally revealed his ownership, it would become front-page news that would pressure all parties to reach a reasonable settlement. As summer turned to fall, Marcus made his final preparations for the legal battle that would determine the fate of Oakwood Estates and everyone who lived there. The moment Marcus had been waiting for arrived on a crisp October morning, when Martha Rodriguez filed a massive lawsuit that would shake the entire Oakwood Estates community to its foundation. The lawsuit named Prestige Communities, the Oakwood Estates HOA, Richard Blackwood personally, and several county officials as defendants in what would become the largest property theft case in county history. Within hours of the filing, Martha's media contacts began running stories about the mechanic who owned $1 million subdivision. Local television stations sent camera crews to interview Marcus at his auto shop, where he calmly explained how he had watched strangers build 96 luxury homes on his family's land without his permission. The initial reaction from Prestige Communities was predictable arrogance. Richard Blackwood held a press conference outside the Oakwood Estates sales office, dismissing Marcus's claims as frivolous and completely without merit. Blackwood confidently stated that his company had clear title to all development property and that they would vigorously defend against this baseless attack on property rights. But behind the scenes, Prestige Communities was panicking. Their lawyers immediately began reviewing the ownership documents for Marcus's land, and what they found terrified them. The forged paperwork they had used to claim ownership would never withstand scrutiny in court. Worse yet, Marcus's documentation was flawless, going back over 60 years to his grandfather's original purchase. The homeowners of Oakwood Estates were caught completely off guard by the lawsuit. Most of them learned about the situation from television news reports, since neither Prestige Communities nor the HOA had warned them about any ownership disputes. Suddenly, families who thought they owned $1 million homes discovered they might be living on stolen land. Emergency HOA meetings were called as residents demanded answers from their board of directors. The meetings were chaotic, with angry homeowners shouting questions about their property values and legal exposure. Many residents had invested their life savings in their Oakwood Estates homes and were terrified about losing everything they had worked for. Richard Blackwood tried to maintain control of these meetings, but his credibility was rapidly disappearing. When homeowners demanded to see the original property acquisition documents, Blackwood claimed they were confidential and part of ongoing litigation. This response only increased suspicions that something was seriously wrong with the development's ownership. History. Several homeowners hired their own lawyers to investigate the situation independently. What they discovered was shocking. Not only were Marcus's ownership claims legitimate, but Prestige Communities had a history of similar schemes in other states. The company had been investigated by authorities in Colorado and Arizona for fraudulent property acquisitions, though they had always managed to settle cases before facing criminal charges. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, the case went to court for an emergency hearing. The courtroom was packed with Oakwood Estates residents, media representatives, and curious members of the public who had followed the story in the news. Marcus sat quietly at the plaintiff's table with Martha, wearing the same simple clothes he wore to work every day. The defense table was crowded with expensive lawyers representing Prestige Communities, the HOA, and the individual defendants. They had hired a prestigious law firm from Los Angeles that specialized in complex real estate litigation. Their lead attorney, a man named Harrison Kent, exuded the kind of confidence that came with charging $800 per hour for legal services. Judge Patricia Morrison had been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every type of property dispute imaginable. But as she reviewed the case files, it became clear that this situation was uniquely outrageous. She had never seen a case where someone had built an entire subdivision on land they didn't own, then tried to evict the actual owner. Harrison Kent presented Prestige Communities' defense first, arguing that Marcus's ownership claims were based on outdated documents and unclear property boundaries. Kent insisted that his clients had acquired the land through legitimate legal processes and that the development had been approved by all appropriate government agencies. But when Judge Morrison asked Kent to produce the specific documents showing how Prestige Communities had acquired Marcus's land, the expensive lawyer began to stumble. Kent requested additional time to compile the necessary paperwork, a delay tactic that immediately raised red flags for the experienced. Judge Martha Rodriguez then presented Marcus's case with devastating simplicity. She placed the original 1962 deed on the evidence table, along with 60 years of continuous tax payments and detailed property surveys. The documentation was so clear and comprehensive that Judge Morrison needed only minutes to understand the situation. "Mr. Williams," Judge Morrison asked, "you have been paying taxes on this property for how long?" "Every year since 1998, Your Honor," Marcus replied. "Before that, my grandfather paid them from 1962 until he passed away." "And did you ever give Prestige Communities permission to build on your land?" "No, Your Honor. I never spoke to them until after they had already started construction." Judge Morrison then asked the key question that would determine the fate of the entire development. "Mr. Kent, can you show this court a single document proving that your clients legally acquired Mr. Williams' property?" Harrison Kent shuffled through his files desperately, but he knew he had nothing. The forged documents that Prestige Communities had used internally would be exposed as fraudulent if presented in court. After a long pause, Kent admitted that his clients needed more time to locate the relevant paperwork. Judge Morrison's expression made it clear that she understood exactly what was happening. "Mr. Kent, your clients have built 96 homes and invested millions of dollars in this development. Are you telling this court that they did so without being able to prove they owned the land?" The courtroom erupted as spectators realized the magnitude of the situation. Oakwood Estates homeowners began crying and arguing among themselves. Media representatives frantically took notes as they witnessed one of the most dramatic property law cases in state history. Martha then delivered the final blow to Prestige Communities' defense. She presented evidence of the forged documents, the bribes paid to county officials, and Richard Blackwood's history of similar schemes in other states. The evidence was so overwhelming that Kent stopped trying to defend his clients and began requesting private conferences with the judge. Judge Morrison called a recess and ordered all parties to attempt mediation before continuing with the trial. But the damage to Prestige Communities was already done. News reports that evening featured footage of Harrison Kent refusing to answer reporters' questions as he left the courthouse. Richard Blackwood was nowhere to be found, having apparently left town shortly after the hearing began. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, he was surrounded by reporters asking how it felt to potentially own one of the most expensive residential developments in the county. Marcus simply smiled and said, My grandfather always told me that patience and good record-keeping would pay off eventually. The legal battle was far from over, but the courtroom hearing had established the fundamental facts that would determine the outcome. Marcus Williams was the rightful owner of the land, and everyone who had built or bought property there would have to deal with that reality. The only question now was how much money it would take to resolve a situation that never should have happened in the first place. The weeks following the dramatic court hearing were filled with frantic negotiations as everyone involved tried to salvage what they could from the Oakwood Estates disaster. Marcus found himself in an extraordinary position of power, legally owning 96 luxury homes plus millions of dollars worth of infrastructure that other people had paid to build on his land. Prestige Communities was facing complete financial ruin. Their insurance companies refused to cover the losses, claiming that fraudulent property acquisition was not covered under their policies. The company's stock price collapsed when news of the lawsuit spread to their other development projects across the country. Within a month, Prestige Communities filed for bankruptcy, leaving their investors and creditors to fight over whatever assets remained. Richard Blackwood disappeared entirely, apparently fleeing to a country without extradition treaties. Federal investigators later discovered that he had been transferring company funds to offshore bank accounts for months before the lawsuit was filed. The FBI issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of fraud, bribery, and racketeering, but he was never found. The Oakwood Estates homeowners found themselves in an impossible situation. They had paid millions of dollars for homes that were legally owned by someone else, and their insurance policies didn't cover this type of ownership dispute. Many families faced the prospect of losing their life savings and being forced to abandon their dream homes. Marcus could have demanded that all the homeowners leave immediately, which was his legal right as the property owner. Instead, he chose a more compassionate approach that would surprise everyone and earn him respect throughout the community. Working with Martha Rodriguez, Marcus developed a settlement plan that would protect the innocent families while ensuring he received fair compensation for his stolen land. The settlement negotiations took place over several months, with Marcus meeting personally with many of the affected homeowners. He was struck by their stories. Young couples who had saved for years to buy their first homes, retirees who had invested their pensions in what they thought would be their final home, and growing families who had chosen Oakwood Estates for its excellent schools and safe neighborhoods. Marcus's final settlement offer was both generous and clever. He would allow all current homeowners to remain in their properties by signing new lease agreements directly with him. The lease payments would be set at amounts comparable to the homeowner's current mortgage payments, ensuring they could afford to stay. After 10 years of successful lease payments, each family would have the option to purchase their home from Marcus at a fair market price. This arrangement protected the families from immediate displacement, while providing Marcus with steady rental income from his property. It also gave the homeowners time to rebuild their equity and eventually own their homes legitimately. For families who couldn't afford the lease payments or preferred to leave immediately, Marcus offered generous relocation assistance funded by the settlement money he received from insurance companies and asset sales. The county government faced its own reckoning as the FBI investigation expanded to include the officials who had accepted bribes from Prestige Communities. 3 county commissioners and 2 planning department employees were eventually convicted of corruption charges and sentenced to prison terms. The county was forced to implement new oversight procedures to prevent similar fraud in the future. Marcus's victory generated national media attention, with news outlets across the country covering the story of the mechanic who outsmarted a major development corporation. He was invited to appear on several television talk shows, though he declined most interviews, preferring to let his lawyer handle media inquiries. The financial impact of Marcus's patience and strategy was staggering. Independent appraisers determined that the unauthorized improvements to his land were worth over $120 million, not including the ongoing rental income from the homeowners. Marcus had gone from being a modest auto mechanic to being one of the wealthiest landowners in the county, all without spending a penny of his own money on development costs. But Marcus's greatest satisfaction came from the justice achieved for his grandfather's memory. The land that had been in his family for over 60 years was finally recognized and protected. Marcus used some of his settlement money to create a small memorial garden on the property, featuring a plaque honoring his grandfather's wisdom and patience. The transformation of Marcus's role in the community was remarkable. The same HOA board that had once threatened to have him arrested for trespassing now came to him for approval of community improvements. As the property owner, Marcus had final authority over all major decisions affecting Oakwood Estates, though he generally allowed the homeowners to manage their own affairs through the HOA structure. Marcus made several changes to the community that reflected his values and background. He insisted that the HOA's architectural guidelines be relaxed to allow for more diverse housing styles and landscaping choices. He also established a community scholarship fund for children of Oakwood Estates residents who wanted to pursue vocational training, honoring the skilled trades that had supported his own family. The country club atmosphere that prestige communities had tried to create was replaced by something more welcoming and inclusive. Marcus opened the community's amenities to residents of the broader neighborhood, not just Oakwood Estates homeowners. The golf course became a public course with reasonable fees, and the clubhouse hosted community events that brought together people from all economic backgrounds. Sarah, Marcus's daughter, played a crucial role in managing the complex financial and legal aspects of her father's new situation. She left her job as a paralegal to become the full-time property manager for Oakwood Estates, ensuring that the community continued to operate smoothly while protecting her father's interests. 5 years after the court case, Oakwood Estates had become a model community that balanced upscale amenities with small-town values. Most of the original homeowners had chosen to stay and work toward eventual ownership under Marcus's lease program. The community's reputation had recovered from the initial scandal, and property values were actually higher than they had been during the prestige communities era. Marcus continued working at his auto shop 3 days a week, despite no longer needing the income. He enjoyed the routine and the relationships he had built with customers over the years. The rest of his time was spent managing his property, spending time with his grandchildren, and supporting various community charities with his newfound wealth. The Oakwood Estates case became a landmark in property law, cited in law schools across the country as an example of how patience, documentation, and proper legal representation can overcome even sophisticated fraud schemes. Martha Rodriguez wrote a book about the case that became required reading for real estate law students. As Marcus sat in his renovated cabin on weekend mornings, watching children play in the yards of homes built on his family's land, he often thought about his grandfather's advice regarding patience and good record-keeping. The land that had been passed down through his family was now providing security and opportunities for dozens of other families, while ensuring that the Williams legacy would continue for generations to come. The story of Marcus Williams and Oakwood Estates proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corporate greed and corruption is simply an honest person who refuses to give up on what is rightfully theirs.